Chapter 5 Oregon Country. The Oregon Country was a predominantly American term referring to a disputed region of the Pacific Northwest of North America. The region was occupied by British and French Canadian fur traders from before 1810, and American settlers from the mid-1830s with its coastal areas north from the Columbia River frequented by ships from all nations engaged in the maritime fur trade. Most of these from 1790s through 1810s being Boston-based. The Oregon Treaty of 1946 ended disputed joint occupancy pursuant to the Treaty of 1818 and established the British-American boundary at the 14th parallel. Oregon was a distinctly American term for that region. The British used the term Columbia District instead. The Oregon Country consists of the land north, south, and west of the Rocky Mountains, with the eastern border generally running on and or close to the continental divide, westwards to the Pacific Ocean. The area now forms part of the present-day Canadian province of British Columbia. All of the U.S. states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, and parts of Montana and Wyoming. The British presence in the region was generally administered by the Hudson Bay Company, whose Columbia Department comprised most of the Oregon Country and extended considerably north into New Caledonia and beyond 5440 north, with operations reaching tributaries of the Yukon River. Negotiations between the U.S. and Britain over the Oregon Country began in the summer of 1845. Because any states that would eventually be formed out of the territory would be free states. Anti-slavery Northerners were strongly in favor of acquiring as much of the territory as possible. America's first proposal was that the territory be divided roughly in half, with the boundary drawn at the 14th parallel. When the British rejected this offer, expansionist Northerners called for greater American aggression, using the slogan 54-40 or fight. Pro-slavery Southern congressmen, however, made it clear that they would not support a war with Britain over the territory. The Oregon Country extended from the Oregon-California border to the base of Russian Alaska. After the War of 1812, Great Britain offered to relinquish its claims to the Oregon Country south of the Columbia River, but the U.S. refused. The crown jewel of Northwest was Puget Sound. It was the only deep seaport north of Mexican California, and the U.S. wanted Puget Sound. Unable to settle the boundary dispute, an agreement of joint occupancy was signed at the Oregon Convention in 1816. Renewable at 10-year periods, this agreement lasted until 1846. Oregon Treaty of 1846 determined the border between the U.S. and Canada at 49th parallel. It was stipulated all of Vancouver Island would be part of Canada. Under the Oregon Treaty, the future states of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and part of Montana were in the U.S. Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail is a 2,170-mile historic east-west large-wheeled wagon route and immigrant trail in the U.S. that connected the Missouri River to valleys in Oregon. The eastern part of the Oregon Trail spanned part of the future states of Kansas and nearly all of what are now the states of Nebraska and Wyoming. The western half of the trail spanned most of the future states of Idaho and Oregon. The Oregon Trail was laid by fur traders and traders from about 1811 to 1840 and was only passable on foot or by horseback. By 1836, when the first migrant wagon train was organized in Independence, Missouri, a wagon trail had been cleared to Fort Hall, Idaho. Wagon trails were cleared increasingly farther west and eventually reached all the way to Willamette Valley in Oregon, at which point that came to be called the Oregon Trail was complete, even as almost annual improvements were made in the form of bridges, cutoffs, ferries, and roads, which made the trip faster and safer. From various starting points in Iowa, Missouri, or Nebraska territory, the roads converged along the lower Platte River Valley near Fort Kearny, Nebraska Territory and led to rich farmlands west of the Rocky Mountains. The Oregon Trail is shown below. Different forts and stations are shown below. Chapter 6. Mexican Cession. The Mexican Cession is the area of the present-day U.S. that Mexico agreed to give up as part of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War. This territory included all of the present-day states of California, Nevada, and Utah, and also parts of Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. It is the region in the modern-day southwestern U.S. that Mexico ceded to the U.S. in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. This region had not been part of the areas east of the Rio Grande, which had been claimed by the Republic of Texas. Though the Texas Annexation Resolution 2 years earlier had not specified the southern and western boundary of the new states of Texas, the Mexican section was the third largest acquisition of territory in U.S. history. The largest was the Louisiana Purchase with some 827,000 square miles, followed by the acquisition of Alaska, about 586,000 square miles. Most of the area had been the Mexican territory of Alta California, while a southeastern strip on the Rio Grande had been part of Santa Fe de Norte, Mexico, most of whose area and population were east of the Rio Grande on land that had been claimed by the Republic of Texas since 1835, but never controlled or even approached aside from the Texan Santa Fe expedition. Mexico controlled the territory later known as the Mexico Section, with considerably local autonomy punctuated by several revolts and few troops sent from central Mexico in the period from 1821 to 22, after independence from Spain up through 1846, when U.S. military forces seized control of California and New Mexico on the outbreak of the Mexican-American War. The northern boundary of the 42nd parallel north was set by the Adams-Onis Treaty signed by the U.S. and Spain in 1821 and ratified by Mexico in 1831. The eastern boundary of the Mexican section was the Texas claim at the Rio Grande and extending north from the headwaters of Jojo River, not corresponding to Mexican territorial boundaries. The southern boundary was set by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which followed the Mexican boundaries between Alta California and Baja California and Sonora. The U.S. paid Mexico $15 million for the land, which became known as the Mexican Section. To the U.S., this massive land grab was significant because the question of extending slavery into newly acquired territories had become the leading national political issue. To Mexico, the loss of an enormous part of its territory was a tremendous embarrassment and created lasting anger among many of its citizens. Under the terms of the cession, the U.S. acquired territory that became the states of California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, with the exception of that territory that later was added by the Gaston Treaty in 1853, which will be later mentioned in the book. The price of this was $15 million to Mexico and $3,250,000 to cover the claims of American citizens against Mexico. The map of Mexican section is below. See how much land was given